Thank you so much to both of you. I have one or two questions I'd like to ask, but I'd also like to make sure we have some time for all of you to ask questions as well. So if you'd like to start thinking about that, we'll get to audience questions in a minute. First, a question on this new research that's emerging. One thing that struck me was that the original evaluation, the voucher for moving was a requirement, right? You required the people who were in that group to move in order to use the voucher. And some of the ideas that you just outlined are a little bit more of an encouragement to move, right? Nudges to move, making it easier for people to move. And it's a slightly different approach. And I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about why that approach is being tried in the second round and how those ideas emerged.
So in the original moving to opportunity, design, the goal was to try to maximize the number of people who really had huge changes in their neighborhood environments to really see if that would matter. It wasn't set up with the notion that this was going to be the policy going forward, that it would be so paternalistic and have this restriction. There are some cases, for example, Baltimore, that have come out of some federal fair housing cases where there have been vouchers allocated and they are operated on you can only use the voucher if you move to an opportunity area, and Baltimore's running it. There's no evaluation with a control group there. And we did think about this. Our sense is that that's, when we were designing moving to opportunity, we actually wanted a fourth arm that gave you the help but didn't require it, thinking that was more realistic going forward. We just didn't have the sample size of doing it. And I think there is a trade-off. In some sense, we're doing a hybrid in Seattle and King County in that the voucher is a regular voucher. It's not restricted to move to a low poverty area, but the resources are only available for moving to opportunity areas. So I think that's sort of the compromise that we've tried to do to still not, say you have to use it and you lose it, but we're going to give you extra resources and benefits, if you move in that direction.
I think from the practitioner side, we've seen both, the voluntary program had a great appeal because it was less likely, we felt, to be labeled as social engineering. And we didn't actually anticipate the thinking around the social engineering that's now emerging as a result of the election, but we think that the voluntary choice is really an interesting path to explore. And what set of things would, say for the business process side, tip a person to make that move? And then secondly, what encouragements on the outcome side, if they do make the move, to Larry's point about the services, what mix would get people to make that choice more readily?
Great, that's helpful. A follow-up question to that. So a lot of the evaluations, even that we heard of today, or if you think about the dots on the map that I showed at the start of the day, were collaborations between one entity and one research team. And it's striking that you're coordinating among 17 different housing authorities. So I would love to hear a little bit more of the story of how did you get the interest of 17 different housing authorities?
Greg's the one who got it.
Yes. Greg, if you can tell us a little bit more of that story.
So somebody calls me and says, there's this new study out by these three guys, I don't know who they are, and you should read it. So I get the study, I'm looking at it, and I said, well, wait a minute, they're up the street. And I actually emailed Raj, and it was summer in Harvard, so we got to meet in his office in shorts. And we had a conversation. He said, well, we need some scale. And we just had a group of folks, especially the moving to work agencies and a number of other folks who have markets that are interested in this, and we started making phone calls. And a lot of the executive directors I talked to in the other housing authorities felt that this is something, because we are charged with administering the vouchers, we should pay attention to and see if we can't connect the voucher families and the research in a way that traditionally we might have tried to ignore for various political reasons.
I think this is a good case study where, you needed the real research out there to galvanize it, but it also takes an entrepreneur, from the, policy side to make it work. So, we weren't going to go out and get 17 public housing authorities. Look, we have these great results without someone who really pushed it and was the entrepreneur here.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions in the audience? And if you ask a question, if you wouldn't mind also introducing yourself and saying where you're from. Wait a moment to let people gather their thoughts.
Hi, Bill Evans from University of Notre Dame. I'm just curious, a lot of the cities you mentioned, Seattle, Cambridge, Atlanta, are pretty high-priced areas. Are there some low-price areas in the Midwest where it might be easier to move people across the neighborhoods and find landlords that are willing to accept the vouchers that are part of the 17?
I mean, Atlanta's got a lot of some of these places have a lot of variation, but all of them have seen rising rents and low income housing.
We hope Minneapolis will join the fold. That market, while under some pressure, is not quite as bad as some of the coastal markets. If you think about it, in Minneapolis, their average housing assistance payment to a landlord is about $710. Here in Cambridge, ours would be about $1150. So that market seems more reasonable. And we might be able, if we can launch a few things, attract other MTW agencies who, because of the legislation, would more likely be in different markets than the coastal real estate.
Yeah, I mean, we have some, Cook County, but that's, highly, is part of it. And San Bernardino County in California, which is, a very wide geographic area of a lot of. So there is a clear mix. Atlanta, Charlotte.
Charlotte's a good one.
Yeah, Charlotte.
Hi, Maya from Results for America. Thanks so much for sharing this story. I think it's so interesting. And actually, two questions. One is, this is an example where a long-term evaluation is so valuable because it didn't appear as if you saw much impact, especially for kids early on. So what does that say for the field more broadly about kind of this investment in long-term evaluations and preliminary findings versus future findings? And then the second point was, I think I heard you saying that at the federal level, there's $40 billion allocated towards housing vouchers right now. And so
low-income housing.
Low-income housing.
Public housing plus vouchers.
Okay. But so do you expect to see a policy change at the federal level towards more of these moving to opportunity types of allocations? And when do you expect something like that?
Well, there already has been a response. Obviously, what's going to happen in the new administration. So through the combination of, I think, the research findings and some court rulings, in fact, HUD issued new regulations last year on sort of what are known as small market area rents, exactly, because right now, outside of the small number of MTW sites that have been able to gain flexibility, typically the way housing vouchers are set is they pay the same rent everywhere in a metro area. So what tends to happen is landlords in places with really low rents essentially get the maximum
vouchers, right,
and use it for things well above, and no one in higher in better neighborhoods will take them. And so what small market rents based on this is saying when there are big disparities across neighborhoods and outcomes, the rents ought to be based on something like the 40th percentile at a smaller geographic area like the zip code or not. And in sort of setting up that policy, in fact, the research was cited as one of the motivating factors. So that is a new regulation that's affecting a large number of areas with some controversy. And there also is, HUD does have an allocation for, evaluating more mobility programs. And in the move to 100 MTW sites, there is the possibility of more broadly doing this. And, so there are things in action now, and then there, have been discussions, by people like Paul Ryan and stuff. Obviously, this is all in the context where there's going to be we believe, a very tight discretionary, budget. So whether that 40 billion will still be 40 billion is not so clear.
And I think that the swap that's likely to occur is there'll be encouraging more flexibility locally with less money. And not one I'm in favor of, but don't have much to say about that. And I think that the things that I would look to, in addition to what Larry has mentioned, is that Ryan and Patty Murray actually collaborated on a bill to set up a research group. I don't think that bill got out of committee. Both houses passed it, but then it had to be negotiated. I thought that was an encouraging sign. And, I don't necessarily think that the speaker's a better way is the end-all and be-all of policy, but it does include some thinking about the things we're talking about here. And I would say that with the Secretary-designee, listening to his confirmation hearing this morning, he's very much interested in giving families opportunity and creating opportunity for them. So that might mean we could do some innovation and experiment and research because those things happen to align in an interesting way.
Maybe we'll take the last question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carrie Chihawk, and I'm from Seattle and King County. I work for King County government. So thank you for your work. And I'm interested in, there are sort of two hypotheses you could have, probably a lot more than just two, but about these types of neighborhoods, right? One is kind of around kids have more exposure to different people from different income levels, or it could be, the community design that creates community cohesion and all of those kinds of things. And I'm wondering if you are looking at trying to test for those effects. We've been doing, our King County Housing Authority in particular has been doing some really amazing work on the community's design piece and some of our public housing, and I'd be interested in your perspective on that question.
Yep. So, we think those are great questions. In the Moving to Opportunity research, we have tried to, look at what are we call mediators, the characteristics of the neighborhoods that lead to the better outcomes. And, there's just not enough ability to really separate them out because they're so highly correlated. I mean, the neighborhood poverty rate is a very good index of that. It's highly correlated, with the share of middle-class families. It's highly correlated. We actually, in the long-term survey evaluation, went out and sent surveyors to neighborhoods to look at indicators of things like graffiti, things like measures of community cohesion, which also line up very well, the share of single female-headed households, but they all, are very difficult to sort out. What the new work that we've been doing does is we're trying to look at the historical data on which neighborhoods lead kids to have the best outcomes and what things predict that, and then use that sort of a machine learning predictive way of getting at it. And that's what we've been doing. We're building maps of every census block and census tract in King County and Seattle to look at the higher opportunity neighborhoods, and it comes with a set of mix. And the other thing we're quite interested in is what we call opportunity bargains. That is, places that have, for the given outcome of kids, have lower rents and are more feasible to use. So they might not have some other amenities that don't matter for kids, access to certain types of jobs or natural resources, but have very good outcomes for kids. So that's one of the things we think is very exciting, is that there are a range of places, if all people cared about was their kids' outcomes, it would all be capitalized into prices. But if we're trying to help families with lower with younger kids, there is the possibility of trying to find the ones that are most affordable and available that lead to good outcomes, and that's sort of what we've been working on so far.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.